Well, praise the Lord. Thank you for joining us today. For you were born to win. Listen, I don't care what you're going through. I don't care what you're facing. I don't care what difficulty has happened in your life. I want you to know that you were born to win. Bishop, how do you know I was born to win? Because the Bible declares that he knows the plans and the thoughts he has for you. Listen what he says. He even identifies them. He says they are thoughts of good and not of evil, only to give you an expected end. Why? Because see, before you were born, I knew you. I ordained you. I set you aside and I called you a prophet to a nation. You have a message to carry to a nation. That's why I always say you were born to win. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. This is another opportunity to live your dream and to step into your purpose. I'm so excited about the word that I'm going to give you on tonight. It's been an amazing week for us, and I hope you've had an amazing week as well. We only have two more lessons in this series, and then we're moving on to the next series that we have. We have tonight, and then we have next week, and then we have an amazing series that I'll introduce on next week. Here's our background text right here. Catch the foxes, the little foxes that spoil the vine. It's the little foxes. It's the little things that is stopping you from going to your next level in God. And that's what we've been dealing with, just the little things. And where do we get that from? Well, we got it from when Ed Reed and the Baltimore Ravens were about to play for the championship. I've told this story about, oh no, about 5 or 6 times now. But when they were going before the championship, and they right before they were about to win the Super Bowl, they played a team before that, and that team was called the New England Patriots. And every year the New England Patriots will always put them out. Ed Reed told them in the locker room, he said, guys, that year that they lost, he said, how are we going to get to the championship when we cannot even do the little things? He mentioned little things like picking up your towels, little things, sprinting through the line, the little things. He said, it's the little things that's holding you back and that is stopping you from going to the next level of your life. And I believe that's what God is saying to us today. It's the little things. Sometimes we think it's the big thing. When I land the big career, when I land the big job, when I get this many members in my church, when this person starts coming to me, when I get married, when I buy that car, when I have this amount of money saved up. It's not those things. It's the little things that is stopping you. It's the small, minute things that are stopping you from going to the next level in your life. And I identified some little things in this series that I believe that's holding us back from going to the next level. The first thing I identified was offense. And we talked about what offense was and how to overcome offense. The second thing I identified was arrogance. And I told you the problem with arrogance, right? I said the problem with arrogance is that people can't get help because they don't realize that they're arrogant. But we also said we need to understand the difference between being arrogant and being confident. There is a difference. There is a difference. A lot of times we have this false humility and we're not walking in the confidence that God wants us to walk in, which is a little thing, but a lot of times we're not operating in that. And we have this false humility. And you know you're good at something. You just need to walk in what God called you to walk in. And I told people, and I gave you my background, I said, a lot of people think I'm arrogant. I'm not arrogant at all. I'm just confident in who God has called me to be. And I try to live that life. I don't try to be anybody else. I know how to be George Johnson. I know how to do that. And I try to maximize that thing. And the third thing, and this is what we've been for the past 4 weeks. And I believe I've hammered this home and hammered this. And I believe tonight we're going to be able to wrap it up. I don't even think the message tonight is going to be that long because I really talked a lot about a lot of things on last week. But tonight, we talked about insecurity. And when we talked about insecurity, I talked about how I believe it's the gateway. I talked about some gateway things, some triggers, that little thing, there's some triggers. We identified insecurity as a feeling of being inadequate, but I told you it's some little things that has happened to you and possibly you've been through that have triggered the insecurity in you, that feeling of inadequacy. And that's what we've been talking about, these little areas that have happened to us in our life, childhood trauma. I spent a lot of time talking about that, told you my personal testimony and how I suffered from rejection. I came from a loving home. I really did. But something happened to me in my childhood when a relative of mine told me something, a secret about my family. And when they told me that secret, it disrupted my life. It really did. And it caused some insecurity. Last week we talked about social conditioning. And I wanted to really just talk about that. And I wanted to maybe not apologize, but I was not trying to, when I was ministering that last night, because when I finished ministering, my wife, she said, honey, she said, you just have to really be careful. She said, because you have all kind of people that out there, and they support you and they listen to you. She said, so you want to be careful that you don't try to isolate one group. And I wasn't trying to do that at all. But what I was trying to show is that there are some underlying things in our culture that sometimes we just kind of overlook. And I focused on the man side, but there are some things with women as well. There are some things with women as well that could possibly cause some insecurities. I remember when my wife was going through the doctoral program. And when she was going through the doctoral program, excuse me, she would travel a lot. And when she would travel, she would go to these different conferences. And she would sometimes be the only female in the room, full of men, the only female in the room. And it would shake her confidence a little bit. But she had to learn how to deal with that because, see, your growth is in that area of your uncomfortability. When you're not comfortable, that's where your growth is. And so she had to overcome that. So I wasn't trying to just harp on some things that personally African American men are going through and those different things, but there is some critical areas I think that have happened. And I wanted to address those issues that are still in our society today, still in our social norms today, and it's impacting insecurity. Tonight, we're going to discuss environments. Environment. What is an environment? I want to define an environment as the surrounding or conditions in which a person, animal, or plant lives and operate. Again, an environment. It's the surroundings or conditions in which a person or animal or plant lives and operate. Okay? It's the surrounding. It's the conditions. Some people call it elements. And here's another definition I like. It's an element that impacts or effect. It can have an impact. The elements can have an impact or effect on a person's conditions, or a person or an animal conditions or plant conditions. Those are some things that can impact a person's outcome, their environment, and what they've come up in. I wanted to read this before I get started, and then I want to go into a story, and then we'll get started, okay? Here's a song by Jay-Z. Y'all know Jay-Z is? Jay-Z, married to Beyonce, a rapper. People call him Hove. I call him Jay-Z. I don't know his real name. What is his? Sean Carter. Is it Sean Carter? Is it? I'm not sure. But I know him as Jay-Z. One of the most, I believe, prolific lyricists when it comes to the rap, when it comes to rapper. Now, my favorite rapper coming up was Tupac. That was my era. I'm a 90s kid, right? So I listened to Tupac, Biggie, Ice Cube, Warren G, I even can go all the way back to the Beastie Boys, Fat Boys, Slick Rick, Dana Dane. Those were come on now, the legend, LL Cool J, Cool Mo D. Come on now. Just legends. I mean, legends in the rap game. But even when you look at all of those, it has to be like a Mount Rushmore of lyricists or people that could rap. My Mount Rushmore of lyrics, people that could really put lyrics together. My Mount Rushmore would be Jay-Z, Eminem. I know it. I know people get upset. I know, but Eminem is a lyricist. I mean, that man can put some stuff together. Arms are swelling, knees weak, mom's spaghetti. That's vomit on your shirt. Mom's spaghetti. Oh, I keep forgetting what I wrote down, but come on now. Come on now, man. I'm telling you, boy, that's in my iPad right now. I still listen to that one. That gets you crunk, boy. Oh man, back to reality. Up there goes gravity. Oh man, come on now, come on now. That's Eminem, right? So I would say my top four, Mount Rushmore is four heads on the mountain of Mark. So my top four would be Jay-Z, Eminem, Tupac, Biggie. That would be my four lyricists. Not necessarily in that order, but that would be my top four. But he says something about environment in one of his lyrics, and I want you to hear this now, and that's what is going to lead into our message. He says, "We're in South Beach and in Hamptons too, baby." He says, "You know why they call the projects a project? An experiment wherein it only objects and the object for us to explore our prospects." Listen to what he's saying. He said, "Do you know why they call the projects a project? Because it's a project." Do you know why they call the projects the project? Because it's a project, an experiment wherein it only the objects and the object for us to explore our prospects, and a sidestep cop on the way to the top. Yes, as kids, we would daydream sitting in our steps, pointing at cars like, yeah, there's our six hustler profits made, our eyes stretch. So some Dr. Spock, and he cursed right there, we started to trek. You know, I don't want to say the cuss word that he said. But I want to talk about this part in the lyric. When he says, "Do you know why they call the projects a project?" He said, because it's a project. The project, you know, good times and in time. They grew up in the projects, right? And then my buddies that's from Birmingham, there were certain areas in Birmingham, we call that the project, right? I had a lady that used to keep my kids back in the day, amazing woman. She grew up in these projects, they call them Caprini Green projects. And so in this lyrics, he's saying here, he said, "Do you know why they call the projects a project?" He said, because it's a project. So in other words, what he's saying here in this lyric is there's a live experiment that's going on or that's happening to people. That's why they call the projects a project. Now, that lyric came from a project or an idea that was done in the 1950s that talked about a mice project. But I don't want to go down that because that story is really dark, and you know, I really don't like how they did the rats in there. Even though I hate rats, I hate roaches, but I really don't like the experiment that took place on those animals. And I don't want to do that to give space to the enemy to come in and try to destroy the message that I'm trying to get across. But what he's saying here is, do you know why they call the projects a project? He said, because in live motion, there is a project. Your environment. He's saying that they are experimenting with you by looking at your environment. That's why they call the projects a project. He said, because it's a project. They're experimenting with you. So the best way that I could describe this was when my wife and I, we were dating. My wife introduced me to this movie. And the movie was called Trading Places. It's a great movie. Eddie Murphy, and I can't remember the white actor's name. But in the movie, Trading Places, they did a project on two humans. And in the movie, what they did was they talked about how the white guy, how he was smart, he was intelligent, he was just a great business person on Wall Street. And Eddie Murphy, who played the thug or the gangster, was like a hustler, was trying to hustle people out of money, act like at the beginning of the scene, he was acting like he was blind and didn't have no legs. And then the police walked up and they trapped him for being a hustler. But at that moment, two rich white guys pulled up in the limousine. And when they pulled up in the limousine, they were talking about um, um, this white guy and Eddie Murphy. And they were talking about, because the guy was reading a story in the paper. And in the story in the paper, he said that your environment impacts outcomes. Do you know why they call the projects a project? Because it's a project. That's what Jay-Z is saying. And what you have to understand here is that the guy in the movie Trading Places, he was saying that if you take the rich white guy and you put him in the same environment that Eddie Murphy grew up in, poor, rugged, one-parent household, broke all the time, hungry. They said if you take the white guy who was this successful businessman, if you put him in the same environment that Eddie Murphy was in, he would not be successful. He will be the same person that Eddie Murphy was. He will be a beggar, a swindler, trying to swindle people out of money. And the white guy said, but if you take the black guy and put him in the environment that the white guy grew up in, privileged, went to the best schools, had the best money, had all of these options to him. If you take Eddie Murphy and put him in that same environment, then he would have been as successful as the white guy. So the guy was saying is, it's not the guys, the two individuals. It's not race. It's not them. It's not their mental intellect. It's the environment that they're in. One environment was privileged. One environment was impoverished. Do you know why they call the projects a project? Because it's a project. That's what Jay-Z is saying. But then the other white guy argued, and he said, hey, regardless if the white guy grew up in impoverished, because I was impoverished, and I made it out, and I climbed out of it, and he would climb out of it. And then he said, either way it go, Eddie Murphy was destined to be that way. And so they made a real bet, and they experimented on these two guys in the movie Trading Places, amazing movie, and they talked about the outcomes that had happened. And it was amazing to me that how Eddie Murphy, once he got in a certain environment, he changed. And then once the other guy got in a certain environment, he changed. So a lot of times it's what you are surrounded with that's impacting your outcome. It's what you're surrounded with. Well, Bishop, how does this impact insecurity? I went a long way to talk about how does this impact insecurity. Because notice I said that environment is the soil of truth. It's the soil of truth. Well, how does this impact environment? Well, there's an old saying that says this, and I don't believe this. It says, you are a product of your environment. I don't believe that. I don't believe that. Because I believe that every person can make choices. You can make decisions. You can make a different decision. You can make a different choice. I don't believe that people are a product of their environment. I believe that people are a product of the decisions that they make. That's what I believe. I don't believe that an environment can force you to make a certain decision. Why? Because I grew up with people that did crazy things. And I did some crazy things at one time. But at sometimes I made the right decisions at the right time, and that's what caused me to have success. So I don't believe that you are a product of your environment. I believe that that you are a product of the decisions that you make. And the decisions that you make can impact your environment. There are four basic environments in real life. When you talk about just life, there are four basic environments. You have atmospheric, you have an atmosphere, a lithosphere, a hydrosphere, and a biosphere, right? Just in the natural. So an atmosphere is the air. A lithosphere will be soil and rock. And the hydrosphere will be water. And then a biosphere will be humans, okay? Those four basic environments that cause life, all right? These four basic environments that cause life can be translated also in the spiritual realm as well. That's my dog Rocky. In the spiritual realm as well. But I want to change the names from atmosphere, lithosphere, hydrosphere, and biosphere. I want to change the names to this: internal, external, spatial, and connections. Let me say that again. Internal environment, external environment, spatial environment, and also want to talk about connections. Those are the four types of environment I believe that impacts insecurity. And I believe that those are the types of environment that if you don't change it, if you don't fix it, you'll continue to go down this road of insecurity. You'll continue to go down this road of anger and rage and not experiencing the best that God has for you. One of my favorite speakers says this. He said, if you're hanging out with 9 broke people, you're going to be number 10. He said that you are a direct descendant, or you are a direct outcome of the people that you hang around. I believe that you are a direct outcome of the people that you make the decisions. Let me tell you something. Many of you have been following my wife, and she has a new thing that she's doing now called I Can. And she's going to be talking about how, like, her personal journey and how she lost weight and how she began to change her life, make better decisions about her life. And a lot of people think that this was an overnight journey. Now, I'm not going to share her testimony. I'm going to allow her to do that through her platform, I Can. But I do want to talk about some of the things that she did. Some of the things that she did. One of the things that my wife did was she changed her internal environment. So what do you mean by internal environment? She changed her focus. She changed her values. She changed her worry, and she changed her greatest fears. And she began to focus internally on the person that God called her to be. And she began to see herself as this masterpiece. It started on the inside first. She changed the environment of the inside first. So in other words, she wouldn't let you be around her and you talk negative. She wouldn't let you be around her and you keep talking about what you gonna do and, well, I'm gonna fix this and I'm gonna change this, and you never change. My wife purposely started shortening phone calls. I saw her do it. She purposely started cutting people off. She purposely started spending more time focusing in on and began to build the inner beauty picture of who she was. Inner beauty. She began to purposely cut off negative people, which is number 2, which I believe is your external. She began to cut off negative people, cut off negative relationships. When people start being around and they begin to talk about the prognosticators of doom and gloom, you know how people talk. I'm just telling you what she did. I remember when she was trying to do it, and when we sit around talking to certain people, and they be like, yeah, one day I'm going to do this, one day. And the one day never came. And the one day still has not come. Because they're always talking about one day I'm going to, one day. And the one day never came. The people that was talking that one day stuff is still in the same situation that they were in. And so my wife purposely started cutting people off, purposely start cutting the negativity off. She will not have a negative conversation. And when people try to go negative, or people try to go left, or they try to go in this negative direction, she will purposely switch the conversation, or she'll purposely cut you off. She would tell you, I don't want to talk about that. She would tell you that. And I saw her begin to change not only the internal, but then she began to, because she changed the internal, then it began to change the external. What do you believe in God for? What do you want God to do in your life? But you keep hanging around the same people. They don't have a pot to cook in, see that? They don't have a pot to cook in. I never understood why people get advice for people that really can't help you. They have no way of helping you, but you keep going to them for advice. And the advice turns into a gossip session. It's not even advice anymore. Some of you need to change the people that you are around because they're so negative. They're so negative. You know, so and so died from that. What's that have to do with me? I mean, so negative. And sometimes people are so negative, they can go from 0 to 1,000. So, in other words, it always ends up in death, or it always ends up in them losing some limb, or it always, because people that are like that, look at what they feed themselves internally. Look at what they listen to. I'm not trying to harp on my wife. I promise y'all, I'm not trying to harp on my wife. She's going to tell you her journey. I'm telling you. And it's an amazing story. It didn't happen overnight. I was asking her the other day, I said, honey, how long do you think this was? And I remember, y'all, how she would cry because she wanted to run. She wanted to be active. My wife has always been an active person. Like, she just didn't start trying to walk and do nature trails and walk up hills and walk up mountains and stuff like that and go on these long hikes. I hate it. Not going to do that. But that's her thing. That's her thing. She's always been that way. Kim has always been adventurous like that. Right? So she starts surrounding herself with people of like minds, people that wanted to see the greatness in her, and she wanted to see the greatness in them. And the conversations began to change. But she changed what she was watching. She was watching this story all the time. I can't think of the name of the story, but it always talks about killing somebody, and then when they kill somebody, they never caught the killer. And she began to draw this connection. She said, honey, it's something about that story. It's causing me to be so negative. I'm sorry. It's causing me to be so negative. That was my clock reminding me. Okay. So your values changing, all that stuff, and then negativity. Number three, I call it number three. Remember I talked about, I said internal, external. Now we're going to talk about your spatial. And how does your spatial place causes? And this would be what I would call what you're rooted in and what you're grounded in, your faith. Now hear me when I say this. A religious environment, it can cause insecurity. A negative environment, bad values, that was number one. Bad values, negative people, and then number three will be a religious environment. Notice I did not say a Christian environment. I did not say a faith-filled environment. I said a religious environment. How can a religious environment cause insecurity? Because, see, a religious environment, it never talks about the love of Christ. And what a religious environment will cause you to do is begin to live a life of regret. Because you'll never measure up to a religion. You'll never measure up to a religion. Never. Never measure up to a religion. So you'll always be insecure because you'll always live in regret. Because it's this bar that you'll never reach. You'll never reach the bar. Because the bar is set by man. And what did God say about man? Man looks at the outside. They look at works. But God looks at the heart. So a religious environment built on rules, regulations. You got to dress like this. You got to look like this. You got to marry this person. You got to do it this way. You got to pray like this. So when I was younger and I first started in the ministry, right? It was this woman of God. I mean, everybody looked up to her. Everybody looked up to this woman of God. And I remember she said something to me, and it really like rocked my faith. Because what she said was, she said, I don't see how a person can be a preacher and they don't pray at least 2 hours a day. I was like, man, I can't pray 2 hours. Now, you tell somebody that to pray 2 hours a day, but you don't teach them how to do protracted prayer. Because she's not praying on her knees 2 hours a day. Because who has time to do that? And you still got to go to work. You still got to take care of a husband. You still got to take care of children. You you still got things to do. So they don't tell you how. You see the imaginary bar? So now here I am, feeling like I'll never be a good preacher or a good Christian. She didn't say preacher, she said Christian. She said, I feel like I'll never be a good Christian. I said, because there's no way I could pray 2 hours a day. At that time, I was like, man, I got ADHD. I know I ain't gonna sit there and pray. I'm not gonna do it. I'm not going to do it. I'm not. No. No, I'm not gonna do it. We make Christianity so hard. We make it so hard to be a Christian. So hard. You gotta do this, you gotta do that, you gotta do this. No. So a religious environment can cause insecurity. What you have to do to overcome a religious environment is you have to understand that your relationship with God is a personal relationship. Your pastor is supposed to feed you the word. The word. But when they start feeding you a lot of rules and doctrine, that's what you need. Like, this is not. You got to be able to back everything up by scripture, not by rules and doctrine. The last one I'm talking about that causes insecurity is, and I want to kind of minister on this one a little bit, and I want to talk about this connections piece. I'm going to minister in a couple of weeks. Next week, I'm going to talk about entitlement. And the message is called entitlement, the poison that's killing us. Entitlement, the poison that's killing, because I believe entitlement is killing people because they don't want to work for anything anymore. They feel like they're entitled. But another thing that's really, really bothering us is what we're connected to. I want to minister on this a little bit. Years ago, in my earlier parts of ministry, I had a dream. And in my dream, I was connected to something that was sucking the life out of me. It was sucking the life out of me. Sucking the life out of me. And I just, in the dream, it was sucking the life out of me, but everything around me was catching on fire. It was burning up. And it was getting closer and closer and closer to me. And somebody was on the outside trying to pull me out of the building. They were trying to pull me out of the building. But I was still connected to this thing, and it was just sucking the life out of me and sucking the life out of me. And my refusal to go, because I was so loyal to the thing that was in the building. This was years ago. And because I didn't go, a big old knife came from a big old huge knife. That's all I could describe it. Came and it stabbed me in my heart. And when it stabbed me in my heart, every part of life left me. I told my father that dream. And my father operated in the prophetic. My father was a teacher. Sort of like me, I teach. But my gifting is prophetic. I'm prophetic, but I prophesy different. You know, some people, they prophesy and they use word of knowledge and word of wisdom, and they can prophesy that way. My prophecy is different. God speaks to me in a different way. So I told my dad that dream. It's sort of, my gifting really sort of aligns with my father. It's amazing. So anyway, my father told me, he said, here's what the Lord is saying. He said, your wife is trying to pull you out of a situation that is sucking the life out of you. Your refusal to listen to your wife and leave will cause death to your destiny, purpose, and mission on this earth. Whew. It was such a powerful word. I wanted to talk about connections and insecurity. Some of you are connected to something and it's sucking the life out of you. And you feel like you have to still be there. But your being there is feeding your insecurity. Now, I don't know who this word is for. See, that's what I was talking about. I was talking about that prophetic gift that I do. This, now I'm moving into that prophetic. You are connected to someone, and your connection to them is pulling the life out of you, the life of your dreams, the life of your purpose, the life of your calling is sucking the very life out of you because you keep lowering your expectations and lowering your expectations and lowering your expectations, and they're sucking the life out of you. And them sucking the life of Christ out of you is causing the insecurity in you to rise. So one way the life of Christ is leaving you, but the food of satanic power is feeding you. You see that? The life of God is being sucked out of you, but the food of insecurity is continuing to be fed to you, to the purpose that you begin to question yourself. You'll begin to question, why did I do this? You'll begin to question, why am I here? You'll begin to question, will this ever happen? You'll begin to question, why me, oh God? It ain't got nothing to do with God. It has everything to do with what you're connected to. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you, like my father told me. You have a choice to make. You have a choice to make. Obey God and live, or disobey God and die right where you are. Not a physical death, but it's a death of mediocrity. It's a death of normalcy. It's a death of average. I just heard this. It's a death of loneliness. Because see, you can still be connected to somebody and still be alone. Hear the word of God. Please join us on next week, guys. I believe it's going to be an amazing word on next week. We're going to talk about entitlement. And then I got an amazing word I'm going to deal with in the month of March and April. And then we'll be talking about communion. We'll take Holy Communion and talk about the power of communion at the end of this month. But I got an amazing word dealing with you guys for the month. Guys, thank you so much for being a part of our broadcast. We're so grateful to have you. You guys are so amazing. We love you, and we just thank you for being a part.